Think about it. In the world of tech, can you just learn a concept once and milk an entire career out of it? Of course not. You've got to learn new frameworks, concepts, and technologies every single day. And to see how you can foster this mindset of lifelong learning within individuals and organizations, join the 18th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay, featuring our special guest, Sheetal Rishi, the Global Director of Cloud and AI at IBM.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sheetal Rishi. I'm the Director for Cloud and AI at IBM. I'm so looking forward to speaking with all of you at our Tanmay's session, Tech Life Skills, and talk about more humans. How do we make ourselves important, relevant humans in the AI world led by machines and robots all around us? I hope you can join us.
Think about it. In the world of tech, can you just learn a concept once and milk an entire career out of it? Of course not. You've got to learn new frameworks, concepts, and technologies every single day. And to see how you can foster this mindset of lifelong learning within individuals and organizations, join the 18th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay, featuring our special guest, Sheetal Rishi, the Global Director of Cloud and AI at IBM.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Sheetal Rishi. I'm the Director for Cloud and AI at IBM. I'm so looking forward to speaking with all of you at our Tanmay's session, Tech Life Skills, and talk about more humans. How do we make ourselves important, relevant humans in the AI world led by machines and robots all around us? I hope you can join us.
Think about it. In the world of tech, can you just learn a concept once and milk an entire career out of it? Of course not. You've got to learn new frameworks, concepts, and technologies every single day. And to see how you can foster this mindset of lifelong learning within individuals. Hello and welcome everybody to the 18th episode of Tech Life Skills with Tanmay. My name is Tanmay Bakshi. Thank you very much for joining today's episode. Now, just before we begin, I do quickly want to give a shout out to a very good friend of mine. His name is Michael. Yesterday was actually his birthday, so I hope you had a great day, Michael. Now, today we are going to take a deep dive into the not so technical part of the technology industry to really see the infrastructure that enables us technologists to build technology and to solve problems. Specifically, today's special guest is Sheetal Rishi. Now, Sheetal is the Global Director of Cloud and AI at IBM Global Markets. She's been working with the world of technology for many years now and has a great deal of experience with not only leading the teams that actually build the technology, but also with helping them sell the technology that they actually build, and also fostering that environment of trust in that team's client relationships. And so that's what I had for my intro today. Now let's hear directly from our special guest, Sheetal herself. Hi Sheetal, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Tanmay, how are you? Thanks
I,
for having me.
of
I am
course, it's an honor to
good,
have you on the show. Thank you for agreeing to be on.
of course.
Now, to start our discussion today, I want to dive right in by understanding. I mean, again, we're talking about the not so technical part about the of the technology industry today, and so I want to start off by talking a little bit more about the impact that recent events have had on the technology industry and also on in your career personally. So, what kind of impact has COVID-19, for example, had on your life, on your career, on your work?
Sure. Thanks for asking me that, Tanmay. I think personally, if you think about it, we're all living in this mysterious future. We don't know what's coming next. None of
Yeah.
the benchmarks are working anymore because what we're going through right now has not happened in the last 90 years, right? So personally, I am like many of our audiences probably. I'm working from home as of March of this year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those persons who had the luxury of traveling across the world almost 2 or 3 days in every week. So going from New York to London was like for me going from home to a grocery store. So personally, very heavily impacted. Did not like it in the first few days, but I think over a period of time, just accepting and adopting WebEx, Zoom meetings, a lot of virtual settings, I guess, has been core to what I've gone through personally. Taking the work from home pledge from IBM sort of helped me just guide what I need to do and what I need to focus on. Learning new collaboration tools, if you will. So adapting, I
Mm-hmm.
guess,
Mm-hmm.
professionally was something that's been happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of screen time personally for my three kids, which I did start off battling them every day, trying to stop them and reducing the time. But at some point, I gave up, and I think we just had to decide one way or the other. Health comes first, I guess. So accepting that second change was important. And then finally, on another personal level, a lot of exploring of our neighborhoods because there is no vacation happening. We're not traveling anywhere, but just exploring our own backyard, I guess, was quite revealing. A
Yeah.
lot of WebEx calls with families and friends, birthday wishes, which is also good.
Yeah.
Uh, Tons of fundraisers that I managed to organize with the help of family and friends again for different causes related to COVID-19. A lot of food drives, a lot of gratitude drives for essential workers. That's pretty much have been what my last few months have been. So living in a lot of anxiety, frankly, I wouldn't lie.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think as humans, traditionally uncertainty gives us a sense of security, right? We
Yeah.
don't have it. Just acknowledging it and living each day as it comes is what's driving COVID-19 personally for me.
That's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned how pretty much everything now is being driven by technology, all the way from, meeting with your family to getting your work done to your kids' education. Pretty much everything is being powered by technology in some way, right? You've had to sort of give up and say, you know what, it's inevitable that we're going to have this much screen time now because we kind of have to, right? What else can we do? And so, actually, before we move on, I quickly wanted to get your thoughts. What do you think the role of technology is in sort of helping us during this pandemic? Do you think technology's enabled us to have a better response to this pandemic? Is something that we couldn't have done 90 years ago because now we have the option of working remotely? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Tanmay. I mean, like it or not like it, I think digitization is key, right? And depending on which monitoring company you follow or monitoring people who are predicting and telling us what are the numbers, who has survived, who has not survived, all of that. I think our success rates of controlling COVID-19 has been by far the best historically, whatever we've gone through. So I really think this whole technology, innovation, digitization is the single common denominating factor for both demonstrating how we have dealt with this pandemic across the globe and also indicating the companies who are surviving today and who will continue to outperform the market, the competition is purely based on their ability to accept the change that has come in and adopt the technology, right? So I think at a high level, if you think about technology companies who are being successful, three things, right? Number one, their focus is on making sure they survive the pandemic. Let's
Mm-hmm.
be clear. That's the single most important focus.
Yeah.
Second, simplification, 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 right? We all know there is so much data that's being thrown at us, and data is the most expensive currency across the globe. But that does not mean that we have to have a complex infrastructure, complex set of technologies. And technology is changing so fast, right? There is a focus on simplification. There's only so much as humans we can learn and adapt. So you have to stay focused and invest in skills and resources that help you simplify your life, not the other way around. And I think the last third element I would add is the ability to super scale, right? So examples of extremely successful organizations like Airbnb or Uber or Lyft, for example, in the market, or the Amazon's business itself, retail business itself, talks about how quickly they were able to super scale, right? Single common factor across all of them is technology. How they have accepted, adopted the technology is defining what the future would look like, right? So from a culture perspective, as organizations, I think all these organizations also demonstrate their ability to motivate their employees to invest in skill building, right? How do you retain and retrain
Mm-hmm.
employees, let them experiment, let them drive ownership, for long-term success. This is the worst economical downturn in the last 90 days, but as they say that none of these things should go wasted. I think it's the right time to also sit back and think how all these things need to be adopted, right? So we know there's travel, retail, restaurants, small businesses, all are really very hard hit. And I don't really think, quite frankly, the stock market or the unemployment numbers are truly reflecting how human behaviors and lives have been hit hard. So it's very clear we are all something that I thought was sitting in Wuhan many months back, and now it's right in my backyard, in my own home. It's triggered. We're all experiencing it, but the survival, I think, is purely based on keeping the connection, keeping the businesses afloat, is because of technology. Keeping it, be it personal or professional. I think technology has had a big role.
You're absolutely right, and I feel like it also gives us a bit of a perspective as to how much we travel. These days, just how much travel's become accessible. That you're right, something that was in a random city in China a couple months ago is now everywhere, and that's just because as humans we've started to travel more than we ever have in the history of humankind, right? Because now we have the infrastructure, we have the technology to enable us to do that. And COVID is, again, this is again a recurring theme on the show almost. It's that COVID has kind of forced us to adapt and also to innovate. Because if we're adapting, if we're changing, we're like, you know what, we might as well change for the better, right? We might as well continue to innovate and push the boundaries and not just create a good enough solution for COVID times, because it's going to have a sort of long lasting impact. We'll get back to that in a bit, but now I want to sort of pivot and talk a little bit more about culture. So, I mean, you mentioned Airbnb, you mentioned Amazon. These companies they have this sort of, or sorry, which one did you mention? Did you mention Amazon or Uber? I'm
Both of them.
Both of them, wonderful. So yeah, all these different companies, they've got this sort of culture of really adapting to technology and understanding that technology is part of everything that they do, and the world of technology I think is unique, right? Because it evolves more rapidly than any other industry by far, right? And I mean, just a couple months ago, we had GPT-2, and people were like, oh, this is the cutting edge of what machine learning is going to be able to do for the next few years. And now, all of a sudden, a couple weeks ago, we've got GPT-3 with 10 times the parameters, and now people are like, oh, wait, no, 100 times the parameters. And now people are like, oh, wait, no, that wasn't the limit. And so, technology is evolving super rapidly, and you really need to have a specific kind of culture at your organization in order to really be competitive in an industry like this one. So, what do you think that culture looks like?
Yeah, I think before I answer the culture question, I just want to step back. People are talking about innovation and transformation. At IBM, having been with the organization for the last 6 years, I think based on 30,000 plus engagement that we've done, AI is a forward step ladder, in the AI ladder that popularly we came out with, right? It starts at technically, it starts at modernizing your platform, that can run on any cloud, in your hybrid environment, on your desktops, and the machines that run in your data centers. And it's a four-step process, right? Your ability to collect the data, organize the data, analyze the data, and then you start infusing AI on top of it. But for doing all of this culturally, what needs to happen is you have to have conducted many experiments, right? And when I say that, I don't want audience to think we don't know what you're talking about. I think experimentation is not like throwing darts and hoping it will hit the bullseye, but it's about creating experiences, right? And as the technology itself is getting more commoditized, people are going to continue to stay fundamental to the modernization journey. Why company A's journey would look different from a company B, why a person would be more successful as an entrepreneur versus another entrepreneur, right? So, and I've worked with clients across the globe, and I have to tell you, Tanmay, and again, it should not be rocket science or surprise to anyone. I think the fundamental common denominator factor has been the humans who are driving success, right? It's very simple. The technology itself, the 4 steps ladder and whatnot, is very common, right? It's just like you buy coffee, and everybody buys the same coffee from a supermarket, but all our coffees will probably taste very, very different, right? Because of different milk water consistency, you add different amount of quantity and how long you'll brew it and things like that. So while I think the technology itself, the steps, the frameworks that companies are talking about, large consulting organizations, specialist experts are referring, I think the fundamental cultural change that's required has to be centered around humans, right? And as humans, though we are 7 billion plus people on the planet Earth, but our needs and values can basically be classified into 54 psychographic profiles, if you will, right? Our needs driven by recognition, the feedback we want, the authority, the ownership, what we want to grow in our careers, in our personal lives, and what we things we value, right? Partnership, social good, technology for good, climate change, the families and friendships we support. So no matter how many new technologies will come in, I think the focus on people and culture that comes out of that focus on people would be very, very critical to stay uh, to stay to stay successful, to stay on the right path, right? We have to continuously be running this stuff in an agile fashion, right? You learn, you experiment, you fail fast, and you learn, right? And if anybody on this world tells me that they have never failed in their life and they've always demonstrated continuous culture of success, I think my obvious pushback is, guys, you haven't really tried the best, right? When Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg came out with his Facebook in his Harvard days, he has talked about how he had experimented with different types of technologies, right? But he still kept going on till he hit the click on company, the concept of Facebook. So I think this whole concept of allowing people to innovate, focusing on human needs and values is very relevant for the culture of AI-led innovation. Today it's AI, and 5 years down the lane, I don't know what you and I will be talking about, Tammy, right? It will be completely different. You talk to me about GPT-3 today, I hadn't even heard of it. The technology is moving way too fast. But it's the focus on human needs and values. I think that's central to any kind of success and ongoing growth.
Very interesting. And what I love about what you mentioned is that it's important for the future to be able to innovate only if you have a focus on people, right? The people who are actually building the technology, right? We always seem to think technology is playing a bigger and a bigger role in the work that we do, and it is. We're starting to see machine learning and AI. These are technologies a lot of people think, oh, it's here to replace humans and the things that we do, whereas we don't really realize this technology is here to augment our capabilities, enable us to be more human. And when we have organizations that are focusing on that human aspect, we have, we have a more innovative environment. Now, there are a couple of questions coming in from the live stream about what we just talked about, but I'm going to go ahead and pause on those for just a moment because there's another question that I have, which is about that sort of AI ladder that you were talking about, right? That sort of AI journey for different organizations. That's one technology that a lot of different companies have been experimenting with to see where it fits in their organization, how they can be using it to sort of reach the next level of offerings that they can provide. And I feel like whenever we say like AI ladder or AI journey, a lot of the times it can be a bit hand wavy as to what exactly that means. We kind of shy away from the details a little bit. So could you maybe share a little bit more detail as to what it really means to be on an AI journey for an organization?
Yeah, see, data, I think, is at the heart of any company's AI journey, right? And with data comes the technology and the people who are going to be able to deliver that technology that supports collection of that data, if you will. any AI is as good as the data is, right? If you have dark data, if you have data that has a lot of gaps, or if the data is not connected, if the data does not tell you, provides insights as needed, your AI is probably not going to deliver the promise, as you would expect. So I think for any AI journey, so when going back to the AI ladder itself, so any organization's ability to identify what sources of data make more sense, right? It could be if you're a product company, for example, or you're a service company. Again, it doesn't really matter what type of company you are. It's important to realize what kind of data I'm going to bring in order to be able to collect and connect is more important as well. Am I going to be worried about what kind of transactions they are doing, what people are buying, when they are buying, what locations they're buying from? So you have to be able to lay out that system of data records, if you will. So that fits into a collection mode. And then once you've collected the data, think about it as building your own library, right? Then you have to organize it and say, this is going to be the science fiction, this is going to be the art section, this is going to be children's section. And maybe that's a way to think about data itself, saying this is critical data, this is nice to have data, this is must have data, data needs to be compliant, as you are incorporating this into your models to make business decisions, right? So that's where comes the third step around your ability to analyze the data itself. So for example, if you are a mortgage company, or if you are thinking, or even if you are running a non-profit, right? So what kind of people, what's your mission, what kind of people you want to reach out, for example, how do you make a decision based on the data that you found out about the people who are in your network? Conducting those analysis is the very critical third step, right? They're all great algorithms, great models out there, but what decisions, what business hypothesis, how do you determine the success of a particular model result that comes out? How do you differentiate a good model from a bad model? A good model
Mm-hmm.
tells you the ability of somebody. If you're a bank, for example, and you're trying to assess whether you can issue a mortgage to a particular applicant or not, your model should be able to incorporate all the data about this human being that talks about his individual compensation he had, his historical transactional buying data, what his economic status is, and then you make a determination of look-like modeling and determining people like him have typically paid off their mortgage in XYZ years, and whatever those parameters are, right? So all of that happens in the third layer of analysis. Now, in that analysis, there's something else very critical, which is to make sure that your data can be trusted and it is transparent and it is fair at the same time. There are no inbuilt biases into that system. So again, it's combination of humans and technology that's at the heart of being able to analyze this in an unbiased way. And that's where the concept of trust comes in, which I'd like to talk about a little bit more as well. And then finally, once you've done all the models, you have to infuse it in a way that can be consumed by the end users, because not everybody is Tanmay, for example, right? Not to put you on the spot, Tanmay, but your level of technology is going to be way ahead of a lot of other people, right? So unless you make it easy, you do not make it very, very simple for me to consume as a consumer, and you infuse AI on top of it. So make it interactive, make it natural language, show me the way to follow and adopt it. You don't infuse, and don't restrict me to writing a line of code, for example, every time I have to use a piece of technology.
Mm-hmm.
Make the machine smart enough. I think if we don't do that, then the technology, the whole transformation, the AI journey itself will fall flat. So going through each of these steps, I think, is critical or forms the skeleton of leading or building an AI journey for an organization in steps, if you will. And it is these are the four steps you should think of taking, but it doesn't mean that these are not sequential. These can be done in parallel, and these don't have to necessarily start at, you have to start collecting the data. No, you can start from any of these four steps, if you will, and build either ways, horizontally, or you can go further down from a depth perspective to start getting more data, for example, or giving in more capabilities of type of data you infuse in the application. So again, it gives you this framework, gives you the breadth and depth of expanding on your AI journey.
There are two things that you mentioned there that I think are really, really exciting. And the first one is that throughout basically everything that you mentioned, one common thread is data. And I don't think we really stress it enough, is that all AI and this modern sort of like machine learning technology, everything is literally just based off of data. I think we stated it quite well in the episode with Sri Ramanuchir from IBM Research. We said that data has much larger gravity than AI does, right? It's more important in the sense that, even though AI takes up all this compute, we always want to move the AI and the machine learning to the data and not the other way around, right? We want to have data wherever it is. We want to move the AI to it, not the other way around. And, there's also these issues like bias that you mentioned, where, a lot of people don't realize that whenever we implement machine learning algorithms, it's not like the people behind the actual algorithms are sitting there going, all right, so we don't like these specific kinds of people. We're going to train our facial recognition system to purposefully discriminate against this certain class of people. That's not what's happening. It just so happens that the data sets we use don't properly represent everybody equally, and that's an issue for sure, definitely. But we have to be focusing on the right side of that issue, not the algorithms, not the techniques, but rather the data that we are generating as humans and the data that we're collecting. And a good example of that would be one of the more controversial ones, at least, would be Pulse, a little facial upscaling system a little while ago, and people were like, "Oh, why is it turning everybody into a very specific demographic of people?" Whereas people didn't realize that, well, it just so happened that the data it was trained on was essentially all that demographic, and so. Focusing on how we can make data representation more fair for us in order to result in more fair AI models, I think is really important. And on top of that, there's also, AI techniques and algorithms that we can sort of use to augment or supplement that fair representation in data. The IBM AI Fairness Toolkit is, I think, a great example of that. It's something that I've been passionate about for a long time, especially because it's open source and you get to sort of see all the different techniques that it helps you with. And one more thing that I think you mentioned that's really important is to, yeah, sure, use AI and augment your offerings and sort of amplify your capabilities. But we don't want to focus on the fact that you're using AI, right? So just as in our last episode with David Kenny, we focused on, when you use AI, your marketing shouldn't be, hey, we're using AI. Your marketing should be, we're providing this experience, and sure, it happens to be powered by AI, but this is the experience that we're providing. And it should be easy to use, right? People shouldn't need to think about the fact that they're using AI when they use AI. I think a good example of that is on the iPhone, for example, right? They definitely don't have the greatest picture quality, but they do have the greatest video quality. And the reason for that is when you're taking even like a 30 frame per second video on your iPhone, and most people actually don't know this, it's actually recording at 60 frames a second with a regular shot and a super low and high exposure shot, and then a regular shot over and over again, and it's using machine learning in real time to stitch that all together into a really good video, right? And so this is stuff that no consumer ever hears about, but they see the experience. They see that they click the button and it works. And that's what we want AI to power, right? And so now actually I want to expand upon a third point of yours that I think you mentioned well and sort of ask you about the world of trust. So you mentioned that trust is really important, and we've covered that a little bit, at least in another episode that we had about blockchain with Andy Martin and Tim Duncan. And trust. I mean, you mentioned that data is one of the most valuable currencies we have. But when it comes to human sort of interaction, I think trust is even more valuable. And so, could you tell us a little bit more about in the professional world of technology, how can we foster an environment of trust between people?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Again, great example. Continuing with the stories that or examples that you were mentioning, Tanmay, right, about eliminating bias, for example. So imagine the classic recruitment process, right? Back in the days, and this is from one of my HR friends who shared that back in the days, typically what they realized after doing some study was that in a certain organization, they found everybody who's actually gotten hired was somebody whose name starts with either the first five letters of A to Z. So A, B, C, D, E. And I'm like, how the hell is it possible that people whose first name does not start with an A are not qualified for a position? And this was based on the data they had analyzed for almost, I think, more than a decade. The reality is the way, and you can imagine, traditionally the way it would happen is you would apply for a position and your applications are typically sorted alphabetically, right? So if you're on a pile and if your name, unfortunately, I'm sorry people, if your name starts with letter Z, you are at the end of the pile, okay, no matter what skills you have. So what happened was as the pile was being processed and as people found who they wanted from a skills perspective, people who were on the top of the pile, and if you actually met the cut, you were hired, and the others were not really called for. And I don't blame the recruiters for that, right? There is a certain need threshold, and if a candidate meets the threshold, you go hire that person and you close the position, you move on to the next one, right? But this is what is called as an implicit bias. Nobody is doing it on purpose. It's just happening by itself, right? So can I trust the recruiter? People will argue. My name starts with letter S, so I probably would have never gotten hired if it was based on the first name, first alphabet. I named both my kids with the letter A, three of my kids with the letter A, by the way. Not because I wanted them to be on the top of the pile, but that was one of the thoughts, oh, their roll numbers in classrooms should be on the top, for example. So all these are examples of unthought through implicit bias that we are all growing up along with. Now that does make humans, it questions, can I trust you or not, right? So imagine this is going to be applied on a much larger scale in a technology driven recruitment process. Let's stick to the recruitment story. So if my modeling is trained on one of the filters that as the applicants come in, analyze, put them as in based on their first names, for example, or age, for example, or gender. I need all males for a technology position. I'm not against anybody, so just hear me out. But if you lay out the filters, and poor technology can only follow your orders, right? So and there could be so many parameters that you should be analyzing as humans, as limited non-AI technology. There could be only so many technical parameters that can be used to determine who's the right fit for recruitment. So now trust becomes even more critical. Now, for every single position in big companies, there could be few hundreds of applicants, for example, and there's no way humans are going to be able to analyze all of that data. And it's also because now, if I am recruiting for one position, I have so many resources that I can invite invitations, applicants from so many different diverse locations, location offices, background, whatnot. But and then I use technology. So the technology has to be trusted, right? The data that's coming in has to be trusted. The data should, there has to be the AI fairness 360 that you talked about, for example. My models and algorithms should give me the ability to say, okay, if there are 100 features I'm looking at to determine whether an employee should be called for an interview or should be granted a position, I want to understand what features, the age, the gender, location, address, previous history, what type of history, no matter what kind of data that's coming in, the technology, the models, the algorithms should be able to analyze that and come and tell me that I am recommending, I being the technology is recommending, go talk to these 10 people who have applied for your position based on features X, Y, Z. Now, as a human, I should be able to see that. So it should be very transparent and visible to me. And I should have the ability to say, okay, I don't care about gender. I don't care about ethnicity, for example, right? I don't want this person to be in New York. This person could be wherever. So take out location. And then in real time, update the model, come back with recommendations saying, okay, now I think these are 10 other people you should be talking to. That to me is data and technology. And all of this exercise is not taking days or weeks or years, months to actually come back with a result, but doing it in real time is where the power of AI comes in, right? Recruitment is one example. And you can, anywhere where you're trying to predict an outcome, you can apply the same philosophy, basically. That's where data, the technology has to be very, very trustworthy. And second element of trust, I think, is around the people. The the reality is that there is no standard playbook that has been written out that says this is how AI models or AI journey. It's not written in stone. There is no gold standard in the industry as yet, right? There is no single definition of AI. What you and I are calling AI could be very different from what somebody else understands AI or machine learning or deep learning, right? So all of these things have very different outcomes people treat. And then there's a third element of people, which is the regulators themselves, right? They're becoming more active in creating policies, which I'm very happy about personally. I think regulators and compliance officers and coming back and inspecting that what data a Google or an Apple or a Facebook or any company that's amassing so much of personal people information, how is that being used to derive business? That sort of is being investigated, and there is a need to come back with some industry standard rules that we can apply and then say, this is AI, this is an AI you can trust. I can grade you based on how many regulations you are compliant with from a people angle. So the trust itself, technically, the models should be unbiased, and if there is any kind of bias, I can go back and see if I made a certain decision for my business, what were the parameters that influenced it, right? And similarly, from a people perspective, where you can imagine a team that everybody has a different definition of the technology itself, of AI itself, so they're going to come back with different kind of output. The regulators in, there is CCPA law in California, there's GDPR in Europe, South Africa has a different law, Asia has a different law, China has a different law. So there are, though we are all local globally, technically the world is very flat, but there is no globally accepted set of regulations that determine what, how people should operate and how decisions should be made by technology. So imagine the chaos that's out there. So trust to me becomes very, very important. And till the time we actually find a standard set of rules to define the market dynamics. I think as individuals, the technology providers like IBM, we have to own the responsibility to be able to provide a technology suite of offerings that allow people the basic fundamental requirements of eliminating dark data, navigating through dark data, applying data governance philosophies, and making sure that the work that's being done is in line with the regulatory requirements of the region that you're operating in. Does
You know,
that
I
make
sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, does that make sense? You know, it's
I
trust is
think
a
I
topic
think
that people are passionate about.
I mean, I think it actually makes a lot of sense. As a matter of fact, I loved your example about the implicit bias. Literally, we got a comment from Tim on the chat saying that's such a brilliant example to use. The reason that I love that so much is because it really gives you a perspective as to, even if you're not purposely putting bias into data, if you were to train an AI model and if you were to feed it all those names, it's mathematics at the end of the day, right? It's not human intelligence where it's going to realize, oh, it all starts with A because they were at the top of the stack. It's gradient descent. It's not going to care. It's going to think that actually genuinely makes a difference. Because as far as the AI model is concerned, as long as it works on the data it was trained with, that's all it needs to do, right? So a possible fix for that is to eliminate the implicit bias, or to not look at the variables that we know don't have an impact on raw sort of talent or skill of that candidate. Actually, this reminds me of a similar example a little while ago. I was training a machine learning model for spam detection, and all of my spam sentences were super, super short, and all of my non spam ones were really long. So the model didn't detect anything, it was just looking at the length of the sentence.
Yeah.
So, implicit bias is something that you've really got to watch out for. The world of data science and AI is a lot more complex than you might see
Yeah.
at first glance. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing those examples. And you're right. It's more difficult to regulate something like AI with that's so like broad and sort of something that everybody does differently, right? AI in one context doesn't mean AI in another context. AI in, for example, IBM Project Debater is not remotely the same as the AI that goes behind exposure stitching in Apple's video camera. So it's something that's going to take a lot of effort and sort of, I think, international cooperation, as you mentioned. It's not something that we can just say, implement it in Europe and China and US and have it all local. It's something that requires international cooperation. So yeah, we got to get those regulations in place without stifling innovation at the same time. So now we've talked about the world of trust and what sort of culture that companies need to have in order to continue to innovate, into the future. But what specific roles do you think are important to, to first of all drive that culture, but also enable innovation at those companies and to enable them to be sort of ready for the future, right? In which technology is growing rapidly. What are the specific roles that you think those organizations should focus on?
Yes. And again, I'm going to speak from a non-tech side of the world, because I think technology, as it keeps changing so fast, there will always be a new set of roles required, right? And before I answer that, Steve Jobs has been one of my ideals, if you will, in many, many senses, right? He once had said in one of his personal autobiographies where he said that don't, do- sometimes customers don't really know what they want, right? Unless you
Mm-hmm.
show it to them. So don't put the pressure on the consumers to say, tell me what you want and I'll build it for you, right? So think of that, about that statement for a little bit. You can conceptualize an idea and then get market inputs, do your market research, but you can't go and navigate the world and say, okay, let me find the idea based on what people are telling me. I think the idea conceptualization needs to be centered at an organization, and the organization could be a small, medium business. It could be a large organization as well. That ownership has to be retained by what you are doing, or as a person, as a person as well. Now let's connect that with what I think are the roles required to enable that mindset and actually put that into practice. I think from an organizational construct itself, there are three roles, if you will, or three pillars that are very important. One is the innovation hub, right? You need to create, build, enable ambassadors who are literally responsible, who their job is innovation. And one of my good friends, one of my client organization, her name, she's Sarah. I'm not asked her that I'm going to quote her, but her job title is she was given the choice to pick from Chief Innovation Officer or Chief Disruption Officer, and she obviously has picked up Chief Disruption Officer, which I think are synonymous, right? So these innovation people are driving innovation, and it's done programmatically. It's not that somebody just wakes up one day and has an idea. No, they are the people who are responsible for innovation. That is their job, period. Do new, change what we are doing, or stop, tell us what to stop as a company. That role is very relevant. And COVID-19 has taught that. If you don't have that team, then I think you are short sighting your own self. So that is one hub that I feel like has to be there. Then second, this innovation, building on what does an innovation hub does, you have to allow this innovation hub to conduct experimentation. I do realize and recognize as a stock investor myself, market is ruthless, guys, right? When it
Yeah.
comes to stock performance. If you do one little thing you shouldn't be doing, your stock is going to tank, right? In the short term, you will go through losses. But I really think innovation and change and entrepreneurship should not be dictated by the short term reaction of the market to what we are doing. We have to we have to take the risk, right? We have to be able to invest, to innovate, allow organizations, allow individuals to innovate. So set up an innovation hub, allow this innovation hub to experiment. And if they fail, you should be able to back them up at least for a good time period without saying, oh, 3 months, nothing came out, shut it down. That is not how innovations work, right? The Archimedes principle, go back and look at history itself. The amount of experiments that were actually done to come out with something constructive. Again, Steve Jobs' example is how I started. Before he actually launched Mac in the form, and I love my Mac. I wouldn't, again, I'm not advertising for a particular brand, but I think I love my MacBook. The output that has come out is not something that was built in day one. It was gradually improved with a lot of failures. He went in, he launched it, was a big failure in the beginning before he took up the market. So allow for that experimentation, have the patience, set up your toll gates, if you will, but there has to be a timeline given for a new idea to take life of itself. And then finally, the third piece is around ownership. I think we have to enable individuals, businesses, to to enable a meritocracy driven culture, right? I don't have to be a partner. If you start your, from my McKinsey days, you start a company as an analyst and you grow up to be a senior partner in the company. So it has to be a meritocracy driven. I may be the most junior employee in the from an hierarchy perspective, but if I have a good idea, I should be held responsible and accountable. So given the ownership from a role perspective in whatever idea we're driving. So allow for innovation hub, allow for experimentation, and let people own what they are talking about and encourage them. Encourage a meritocracy versus a hierarchical organization construct, I think, are critical cultural requirements. From a traditional roles perspective, I think if you cut across all these three dimensions, there's a business analyst, there's a data steward needed, there's a data engineer needed. There are tech architects who would be required who can define all these Legos and how they'll come together, because you're not really building. If you're going to build click to deploy solutions, the architects have to come back and tell how all of these things will be stitched together. then there have to be product owners who can, what you built, can launch it in the market, right? There's a very common saying that there are only two ways to be successful: build a great product and then be able to market it very well. And those things, I think, have to be owned by the product owners themselves. And then in the new data world where there's so much of data and compliance, security and compliance specialists, I think, will become even more demanding. This could be a combination of lawyers, lobbyists, people who govern, make the law, right? Those kind of roles are required technically. And then finally, to close the entire loop, I think there has to be a set of people who are constantly listening to the market. What is the consumer telling you about the experience with your product or your service? So I think all those roles, 7 or 8 roles, complete the loop that's required in organizations to innovate.
Specifically, there's one aspect of what you just said that I think is really interesting. And first of all, thank you for sort of taking us through that whole journey. I think every step of that makes a lot of sense, and when you tie it all together, you really start to get an understanding of where exactly organizations should be looking to invest, or looking to sort of focus in order to maintain their innovative spirit and sort of future proof themselves. But I really like what you mentioned around, innovation doesn't happen in 3 months, right? Innovation doesn't happen quickly, right? Innovation is fundamentally something that requires a lot of experimentation, requires you to go out there and figure out what it is that really, at the end of the day, your people are capable of, right? I mean, you mentioned MacBooks, and we all know the result of Mac OS 9 and the switch over to Mac OS 10, and then there was the whole controversy of how do we switch from Mac OS 9 to Mac OS 10, right? It's a fundamentally different operating system. How are we going to switch from the Carbon UI to Cocoa, right? There's all these different things that we don't think about, and they're things that we have to um, really take the time to be able to look into and innovate. As a matter of fact, before we continue, there is one quick question from Tassin actually on the live stream that I want to ask you, as it's related to what we were just talking about. He asks, what are the biggest mistakes that organizations make when it comes to driving innovation?
My biggest mistakes when driving innovation, you
Yep.
said?
Yes.
I'll, I'll speak from my experience. I think this whole short-sightedness or not prioritizing if there are no immediate ROI visibility is probably one of the mistakes that I think people didn't experiment, push themselves hard enough, I think, is one big mistake organizations do and probably will continue to do. And again, as I said, I think there has to be a fine balance. I cannot be in a constant, endless circle of death and where I'm just experimenting and with no output results. But at the same time, I think we have to give the patients, we have to give the innovators time and effort and guidance and coaching needed to continue to innovate, right? And then again, I'll go back to my philosophy of saying have an innovation hub, so give them the time they need, right? Let allow them from experimentation. And I think the second biggest mistake sometimes we end up doing, again, not necessarily on purpose, but I think it just happens given the human nature, is as they say, failures has success has many fathers and failure has none, right? So when you have too many cooks, if you're trying to cook something and you don't really have a clear line of sight into ownership, accountability, somebody who's really calling the shots here, that also tends to create chaos, and companies, in my opinion, fail pretty flat out, if you have too many people trying to dictate what needs to happen. Those would be like my two observation from the industry, who are not companies who are not really innovating fast enough or innovating at all, if you will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's another question that we not question, but a little comment that we got from a YouTube channel named Science. And the comment is that there is too much red tape in grown-up organizations. Culture change takes generations. It's not just a short-term investment. And I feel like companies are starting to slightly get better at that. I will say that, like, I think IBM maybe is a good example of an organization that you would think that after being around for over 100 years that they would be, stuck in the past, but we're actually not. IBM's not, as stuck in the past. And I mean, in order to survive as long as IBM has, you have to really continue to not only just survive, you have to thrive in new businesses and new technologies and all sorts of things. So I think we're starting to get better at that, but you're right, there still is a lot of red tape that people need to deal with. What do you think?
I again, honest answer, yes. And honest answer, will we 100% eliminate red tapeism or bureaucracy? Probably not, right? As an individual, I might have been, I would say, I probably have been one of those very successful people who constantly got coached and surrounded by great mentors I've had in my life who have helped me guide through my great bosses, my managers, my mentors, who have told me, guided me my own career navigate as I've navigated through the journey. Uh, have I not been blocked? No, I've been blocked many times, I think. Again, I think acceptance, there is no right or wrong answer, guys. I wish there was, which I could have shared and had a crystal ball and said, if there is red tapeism, I think we need to just learn how to live with it. And as humans, please take the ownership that you are not going to promote red tapeism. That would probably help curtail it or keep it under control. There will always be pockets, islands of excellence in any organization. So if you can't change, be the change you want to drive in any company, in any business, in anywhere you go, right? If you do not fundamentally believe in red tapeism, if you do not want to promote it, start with your own self. Take ownership, ride the ride. And if that place does not support what you are up to, please be willing to move away. Life is just too short, right? You want to fix things, but if you feel like, no, you just cannot, it's okay to take a step back and do something different. That's at least been my philosophy. I do, and again, always be ready to listen for feedback, right? Sometimes what we interpret as something different could actually be very different, right? As an HR leader, as a chief diversity officer, for example, as somebody, I mean, I personally, for example, Black Lives Matter, that has been a sensitive topic around us until now. I wasn't very sure, frankly. I couldn't really relate to it. I couldn't understand, being a brown myself, if I'm going to start putting color on me. I couldn't really relate to what does it really mean? Why is it so important? I actually walked. I did a very simple experiment. I joined one of the Black Lives Matter, a walk that was organized by a high school student. So let me just go and experience the experience, right? So there sometimes when you join that path, you experience what is really going around you, and then you understand that it's not really red tapeism or bureaucracy or people just making up stuff. There is some truth to it that you have to understand. So just putting the story together, if you personally feel that in your organization, you feel there is too much bureaucracy or you're not able to do what you want to do, step number one, own it. Stand up for what you think is right. Do the investigation to figure out that, are you really right? Is that really how things should be? And trust me, along the way, you will find people who are like you, people like you, who will be able to drive change in the organization. And yes, IBM as a company, I'm very fortunate. I've worked with McKinsey, I've worked with Citibank, I've worked with IBM now. I think I've been very fortunate to have been working in these organizations. All of them are multi-year old, right? And all of them are meritocracy-driven organizations where I have fortunately found ways to stay away from red tapeism on purpose. And as a leader, as an executive in IBM, I'm personally going to keep pushing along, making sure there is no bias, meritocracy takes over anything else, and encouraging, motivating, understanding the basic principles of what's not right and what's wrong has to be delved into personally yourself. Don't accept the change if you don't think it's right. Please speak up for it.
You're right. There isn't really a single answer that we can give everybody, right? You're absolutely right in the sense that it is a very case to case thing, right? We can't just say this is what you should do to prevent red tapeism, but rather it's more of what culture fits a company. What are the kinds of people that work there? Are you willing to continue to work? Can you be the change in that organization? There's so many things that sort of tie into that. Now, of course, there are so many wonderful questions we're getting from the live stream, but just before we get to that, there are a couple more questions that I want to ask you, Sheetal, and the next one actually happens to be on the world of sales. So we had a sales executive on the show a little while ago, and she has 30 years of experience with sales. We talked about the world of sales, but I wanted to get your thoughts now specifically on how the role of sales has changed in a digital world. So, how has technology enabled better sales? Has sales itself changed fundamentally, as in what it does and how it does it?
I'll give you two examples, all right? And I'm glad you asked this. This is, I think, each one of us is a seller, right? In the new world, everybody, you could be, Tanmay, you yourself know so much about technology, right? But I'm sure you also experience are required to go through a stage where you can explain to the other person what you're really talking about. That makes you a seller as well. All of us are sellers at the end of the day. Now, also understand if your product or a service that you have built is very good, technically you should not need any sellers, right? So, as humans, I always continue to advise, and for my own self, I follow the path. I don't want to compete with a vending machine. Do not be try to be a vending machine. I mean, if I can go and grab a piece of Coke, Coke can of Coke from a vending machine. I don't need to go and talk to a human being and ask and go through the habit of this transaction that I need to conduct, right? So, as if you are in a sales role, please remember three things. Number one, you have to be consultative in your approach. Okay, you are consulting constantly with who you are talking to. Number two, you need to learn how to collaborate. Okay, collaboration means doing things together. You are a partner to your client or to your organization who you're speaking with. And again, leadership, seller is also sales is also becoming a common skill that all of us have need to have. And third, the attribute that you have to have is of a good listener and a good observer. So go in with a consult. If you are not a consultant, you're not a seller. If you are not ready to partner, collaborate, you're not a seller. And if you don't want to listen, you just want to tell what you have or what product you own, you probably would not be able to deliver 100% of what your role aspires. So learn, I think those three attributes are very important in the digital world for a sales profession, if you will. And again, sales profession does not is not no more tied to your title. If you are a seller, only then you are a seller. You actually have to be a seller. You could be leading HR, you could be a programmer, you could be collecting consumer feedback. Any area that you look at, you have to be a seller. And I think the second lens to this is, I'll give you an example. Imagine you walk into a multi-specialty hospital, right, where there is a cardiologist, there's a gynecologist, there's a radiologist, and you're forced to take advice from everyone without really knowing what the hell you walk into a hospital. You don't want to be that kind of a organization. You have to be someone who, when somebody walks in or when you reach out to somebody proactively, you spend the time upfront to understand and analyze and diagnose what your problem is, and then you direct them, if you're in a multi-specialty hospital, to say, okay, you need to go see a cardiologist or you need to see an internal medicine specialist, for example. So I think remember that. So as a seller, you are the face of a company. So you must spend the time to understand your client's business problem, their situation, consult with them. Don't try to jump the gun and say, oh, I've got these 10 amazing things and I'm going to just sell them to you. That's where I think we lose focus and we don't meet our sales target sometimes. And all of this, by the way, is happening on the pretext that I really have an amazing product. So your product has to be great. And as a seller, those are the things we're talking about. Sales roles, I think those three things are important for a seller. Again, consultative, collaborative, and a good listener.
What I love about what you said is that through the three main points for the first lens that you mentioned, it sort of depicts that evolution of the role of sales within organizations. As a matter of fact, Tim Duncan actually has a wonderful comment that I think summarizes a lot of this really well. In a sales-led era, salesmen were the focus. In a marketing-led era, fancy ad campaigns is what the focus was. In a product-led era, experience is what the focus is. The experience is the seller, right? I love what he mentioned. Like, again, going back to the Apple example, right? They could pretty easily put in their ad campaigns that, hey, we record at 60 frames a second, then we take the second frame and we use machine learning to combine the two exposure shots, but they don't. They just say you can record great videos, right? And that's what people end up buying. Or similarly, what you mentioned is that if you're not ready to consult, you're not a seller anymore, right? The base, what we used to think of as salesmen, that's something that we all need to do now. And now, if you're in sales, you need to go to the next step. You need to genuinely start consulting, because now technology is personalized. You can't just say, hey, we built a mainframe, everybody go buy this mainframe, right? You've got to say, all right, we've built this very specific solution for your company, and we can help you integrate it with your data for your offerings. So, it's a lot more targeted.
Yep, exactly.
Now, things are evolving really quickly, right? So we've taken a look at sales, for example, right? Sales has been evolving very rapidly because it's associated with technology. I mean, at least within the world of technology, things have been changing very rapidly, and that means that people need to be able to continuously learn and adapt and, reskill, upskill. If you're in sales going into the world of consulting, that's something that, you would kind of take a double take at that. You would be like, what does that mean? Why would a salesman need to be doing consulting now, at least at a preliminary level? But how exactly do you think that we can sort of drive this mentality of lifelong learning, first of all, but what are some resources that you think people can actually use in order to achieve that?
I think I want to go back to what you said, right? Experience as a seller, right? So from how do you, yes, everybody is talking about be a lifelong learner, be an Olympic learner, your your learnability, learn to learn, I think is a big skill that we all have to not only acquire, but practice it on an ongoing basis as long as we are alive, actually, not about just about our jobs, if you will. But the businesses we are going to run, we are running already. Our ability to learn is at the heart of this, right? And as a seller, and anyone experience, I think as a developer, as a machine learning specialist, as an AI specialist, the more we can experience, the better we are. And in all of these, I feel like for us to be what will make us future ready, we don't even go into future. I think it's relevant in today's environment. I think that there are three things again. In McKinsey, we were taught there are always three things, by the way. So I think it just constructs after three, I cannot think anymore. When I say my three things, I'm done. But I think, honestly, there are three requirements from lifelong learner perspectives so we stay relevant, which is around communication. So my usual simple rule of thumb is that if I can't explain anything to my elementary school children, I probably am not doing a good job. So I have to dumb it down. And dumb it down does not necessarily mean that you think the person on the other side is not smart enough. It basically means you are keeping it simple and to the point, right? So focus on your communication skills is important. And secondly, there's a lot of emphasis in schools, in our day-to-day life, this whole concept of critical thinking, right? Stitches back to our concept of innovation and allowing people to conduct experiments. I think critical thinking is also a skill that can be developed, and it needs to be developed. It has to be developed. We have to be able to define the problem, understand the problem, and be able to propose a solution for the problem, no matter what kind of role you're talking about. You have to learn what does it mean to be a critical thinker. And finally, I'm a big fan of collaboration. I mean, the world is probably was flat. Now its world is flatter, I guess, right? With or without COVID-19. I think without COVID-19, we in the tech world were using more technology and we could see the power of bringing different geos together. But after COVID, I think all of us have experienced through the common use of Zoom and going virtual, how important it is to collaborate with different types of people across cultures, across ages, across genders, right? So these three capabilities or skills requirement, I think should be at the heart of everything and anything anybody is aspiring to do, right? Learn to communicate what you are trying to say, keep it simple, dumb it down. Second thing is about ability to solve problems, so critical thinking. And then lastly, learn to work with humans, basically humans and machines now, actually, I should say,
Yeah.
collaborate.
It's 12 o'clock.
It's both of them, collaboration.
Yeah. You're right, and I think a pretty funny example, honestly, of what you mentioned about learning to learn. Right, learning to learn is really important because learning is a skill in itself, and knowing how to do that is something that can help you in really everywhere. Technology happens to be the industry where we're talking about it, but it can really help you about pretty much anywhere, and it even helps machines, right? So a good example is there's a paper called "Meta Learning a Dynamical Language Model," and it's by a company called Hugging Face, and they do a lot of work with natural language processing, and this paper in specific is about creating a neural network that learns through gradient descent how to make another language model learn, and they get really good results on long-term, medium-term, and short-term dependencies through that language model because they're doing that sort of meta learning framework. So just a funny example that meta learning is both important at a human level and even a machine learning level. So it's definitely important, and I mean problem solving in general as well. That's something that I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for how generic our intelligence is. You learn how to code, and suddenly you've learned this whole world of problem solving that you can apply to anything else. Like cooking is a great example, right? There's problem solving everywhere in the world of cooking, and like innovating and being creative in the world of food, right? So you wouldn't think about it, but you learn how to code. That's going to help you indirectly in some way through the world of food as well. So
Yeah.
it's
Right.
it's interesting to see how one thing can transform into something completely different because our intelligence is just so generic.
Yep, that's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So now another thing is, we've talked about trust, and I feel like a good part of trust is having like people that you trust and they trust you. Uh, Kind of, yeah, so essentially like a network, right? So having a network of people that you can collaborate with, or that you can call upon when you need help, or that you can work with, and my question for you is, how does somebody in the world of technology actually go about building a network like that, and can technology help you do that too?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you and I are talking, I think it's a great example how we discovered. And I've seen you, actually, I've heard you talk, I think, in one of our Think sessions. This is like 3 years back. And I'm like, what is this little kid doing up there? And you did such a great job. But yeah, so the technology has helped me network, and I'm today talking to you and sharing our experiences with our audience, right? Which is a great example. So, building, maintaining, developing network is, I think, again, one of the skills. And how do you do it? uh, Again, it's very subjective, and it will change with time. So don't take, depending on what stage of career, what stage of life you are in. So I'm a working mother, for example, so my priorities, my dimensions are different, and I'm pretty sure with a young undergrad student will be different. My parents, these things are very different, right? So take it with a pinch of salt, the grain of salt here. But I think, number one, we're a planet of 7 billion plus people. You don't need to know everyone, please, okay?
Yeah.
I love Facebook, I love Instagram, I love all these social networking platforms. But again, please remember, uh, having the number of followers on these places does not necessarily mean that you're related to everybody, right? So investing, finding the time to invest in meaningful relationships is very, very important, right? This is pre all these social media days. I think it was said that on an average, as humans, you will meet about 80,000 people. Okay, this all again, I no way to testify or confirm this is exactly right, but that was the average number. So I don't know how many thousands of people I've met so far. I probably met all of them already, I guess, or even more than that. But my relationship network, people who are at the core, at the heart of, if I'm in trouble, or if I'll be the first one to stand out. I want to stand out for everyone, but that's humanly just impossible. So please learn to build your network, personal or professional. Who are your mentors you would go to? Who are you really following? Who are you going to be influenced by? And when I say influenced by, it does not mean that you need to become that person. Be yourself. That's the second requirement to build your network. Learn, hear, learn from many, but remember, at the end of the day, be yourself. We are living in a world of instant gratifications where our popularity index is measured by how many likes you get, how many loves you get, how many people are posting, how many people are watching us. But again, please remember, do not try to change yourself based on who your network is. Build your own network. The social network is very different from your personal network. I've heard a lot of people who have said, oh, I join all these social networks on social media. I was talking to one of my friends who's in the mortgage business, a real estate business. He said, I have never made even one single sale through my networks on social media. There's definitely something not working. But please don't use that as a reflection of how you build your network. So and the third thing is, always remember as you're building your network, it's a two-way street, right? You give something, you get something. There's always a give to get. So mentoring your colleagues, your family, your network, and I fundamentally believe each one help one in that mantra in life. So as you build your network, remember less is more. So invest in meaningful relationships. Be yourself. All of us are are blessed with specific skills. Focus on nurturing your skills. Be yourself, and I think you will automatically start building these relationships with people who are like yourself, or who are completely opposite of you. That can also be that. Don't change. Don't try to be a pseudo somebody who you are not. And I think the best way to do this is giving, the concept of giving back. The more you do that, the more you'll run into people who are in a similar mindset, if you will, and your network will keep growing gradually as you move along in your lives and your careers.
I feel like what you mentioned around how even the fact that we're talking today is because we met and we figured out each other. That the work that we're doing, and the fact that we were able to connect is powered by technology. So at the end of the day, even this human interaction that you mentioned is being powered by technology, and that's really incredible to think about. And we can use this tech to sort of augment our capabilities in connecting with each other, and collaborating and sort of working together to build out innovative solutions. I think that's really important. I mean, you mentioned that the guy that you were talking about didn't ever make a sale through social media, but that it also boils down at the end of the day to demographics, right? The people on social media that you're talking to, are they the kinds of people that would want to buy your product? There's so many things to think about, but at the end of the day, it's useful technology. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just be clear, okay? So the experience I was sharing about, I saw you. You did not see me, because I was one of like 30,000 people sitting in the audience listening to Tanmay, the 14-year-old kid. So I knew you. I saw you from there, and ever since then, I think it was somewhere in my mind that I want to talk to Tanmay one of these days, and yalla, this magically happened because I saw you on LinkedIn, your activity. I'm like, okay, there's something maybe I can talk to you about. So there you go, we connected, right? And that's, I think, a network building exercise. So keep it meaningful, keep it relevant. And if you are focused, you will end up interacting with that person. And it's also said, every person you've never met, I think you end up meeting the same person at least 7 times in the life. Again, this is all analyzed analytically.
Yeah.
So you and I at least have met for 2 times. We've got 5 more to go. Hopefully more than that. But
Definitely
invest
more.
in an equal relationship, guys. Don't just waste your time.
Totally. There's definitely more. I'm actually very interested to do some analysis on LinkedIn data, and I would love to see if the 6 degrees of separation hold up on the entirety of the LinkedIn network. It would be interesting to see if you could technically connect to anybody on LinkedIn through just 6 degrees of separation. That would be interesting to see. But unfortunately, I've tried this, but LinkedIn doesn't provide a pretty comprehensive API. They like to keep their data to themselves, unfortunately. But hopefully, sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so now there are, again, lots of questions coming in from the live stream. As a matter of fact, we might as well go ahead and answer one of those questions before we continue. Also, Meghana, I also do see your question. We'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, I want to ask a question, sort of two similar questions asked by both Science and Akash Gupta on the live stream chat. So they are asking, how do you suggest that conventional organizations actually budget themselves in cleaning up their data, that in order to actually use it with AI? So like the actual data science for AI, because that costs money. How do you suggest that organizations actually go about doing that? And also, Akash Gupta is asking, how should startups, for example, go about innovating if experimenting can be such an expensive affair? So I think both of those questions are pretty related. So what do you think?
The good news is we are not in the world where we have to build giant monolithic solution, right? And that we cannot use. You start building a scooter, and then you go end up building a luxury car if that's the mission you're on. I think that's the mindset you have to operate in. So any innovations we have done, at least I've been part of with my clients and personally as well, right? Set up some short-term goals. There has to be an indication of success, and you can reinvest. Make them self-funding in nature. So while I'm trying to solve for world hunger, if today I can feed 5 people based on some philanthropic activity I have done, that gives me the power to go and expand to 50 and then 500 and then 50,000. Expand your network. Don't start with a giant problem. I think is by the way, somebody you asked this question earlier also. I think is another thing that you have to be focused on. Less is more, as my boss says. Keep it simple. Start small and make it a self-funding, self-annuity capability that you build by which you start expanding on. I think if that's a philosophy you take, even if you're a startup, what is the one simple problem you're trying to solve for? In this world today, I personally think don't wait for perfection. Launch it out there, get it tested, and hopefully if it's a failure you would have still learned something that you can go back and launch a different updated version of your product. And um, and if and if you are building something, please build it in a form or fashion that's consumable and creates a revenue stream for you or a cost saving stream for you. Very simple. Either there's a revenue growth that comes out of that innovation as an organization, or you reduce the cost of doing a traditional process, and that should give you enough ammunition to keep going to the next level.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. And there's actually there's a sort of similar question that I wanted to ask from Cecily. She's asking, how does innovation help the economy? So, pretty open-ended question, but I would love to get your thoughts. How does innovation help the economy?
I love it, and I'm glad you asked this question, and something I constantly think about as well personally. I think it's a shared economy. Okay, the innovation has created a shared economy where people are doing more than one jobs. There are two sides to it actually. Let me step back. There is some concentration of wealth that has happened because of innovation and transformation. Um, that's a given. That's a known, right? There are certain number of people who are controlling more than half the wealth of the planet today. Okay, so that's one side of the problem, which you and I can't solve for right now on this conversation, but I have my theory on that. But I think the other side, from an economy perspective, it has created is the opportunities for us, right? A traditional, if I was a mailman, for example, or a mail woman, for example, traditionally, previously, I would be in a 9 to 5 jobs delivering mail. That was my only job I did. I knew. But in today's world, it has created, I can be renting my house. I could be a landlord renting my house on Airbnb. I could be renting my car. I could be driving my car, being an Uber Lyft driver. I love animals, so I could be providing dog service on rover.com, for example.
Hmm.
I don't have to, nothing against financial advisors, but I don't have to have a financial advisors because I am investing on a certain application on my phone and I can keep my balances up and going. So I think that distributed ability for humans to do more with less at this point of time without necessarily going through a 9 to 5 job schedule is the outcome, the benefit of the technologies, the upside. That's how I see it. And again, everybody's becoming a blog writer, everybody's becoming creative. We're not only dependent on Disney's movies to come back with creative videos, right? YouTube has done a fantastic job in letting people create their innovative creative thinking, apply the creative thinking and come back with a nice short video, for example, or short movie, for example. So all those things have some underlying economical impact. Those are all the pluses, right? So it gives you more ability to create, generate wealth for yourself. And then there's also a downside of it, which I think we all collectively need to figure out. And more large organizations have to take the ownership along with the governments, along with the United Nations of the world, for example, to come back and say that how do you ensure there is distributed wealth in this process? You're not limiting the wealth, the center of gravity to lie in the hands of few people by name, but find ways to share it across the world. I think that's probably the next challenge that needs to be solved for.
Hmm. I think innovation, and specifically, even if we were to focus on technology, it has I mean, as you mentioned, sort of an impact on the economy on multiple different ways. And One way that I think is really, really important, and something that I don't think we pay enough attention to, is that up until a few thousand years ago, right, the world was a zero sum game, right? It was like, if there's a pizza, the more pizza I have, the less pizza you have, or the more you have, the less I get. So I want to have as much as possible, even if that means you get less, right? But what we don't realize is that with technology, we have fundamentally transformed the way the world works, in the sense that if you were to invest in something completely unrelated to you, something that in a completely different part of the world, in people that you might never talk to, that investment eventually will come back to help you in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like the issue is, and the reason that it's important for us to ask questions like what Cecily asked, how does innovation help the economy, is because, humans, we think we're pretty advanced, but at the end of the day, we're still primates, right? We're still we're still animals, and we fundamentally have subconscious biases. Like, we're still territorial. We still want to have more of things that we own, even though technically it might not be worth it. It might not be something that we need, but we still want it because of a subconscious desire to do it. I mean, look at optical illusions, right? There are certain optical illusions that fool us, even though we consciously know that things aren't there. They appear to be there because our subconscious is biasing, our visual cortex to look at that data in a certain way. Your system 2 is being fed incorrect information by your system 1, right? So I feel like it's going to take many, many generations until we can eliminate, or I mean, this is definitely something that's up for debate, but it's going to take time until we can get rid of that subconscious bias and realize, oh wait, it's actually advantageous for us to help everybody. But I think it's important to ask questions like this, because it's something that we aren't used to thinking or about, or talking about very much.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, the economists of the world are predicting that by 2030, there will be $15 trillion of economic value created driven by AI technology, right? But again, what I'm saying is, what I don't know is that $15 trillion going to be considered in the hands of less than 10 people on the planet? And I think that's a problem that the rule makers of the world have to decide, agree on. But I think as individuals, as people like you and me, I think this will create a lot of opportunities for us to do different things that we are really truly passionate about.
Yeah.
As the planet, 7 billion people and growing, because of technology only, I think we've been able to still um, exploit the resources in a way that can take on the load of so many of us, and hopefully, I mean, there is a lot of responsibility that needs to come along as well, and climate change efforts are all going on in full swing so that the planet is livable for the rest of so many years and we don't get out of water, for example, things
Yeah.
like that. But I still think the fact that we are so many on this planet, we are living longer. I mean, I know COVID-19 is a pandemic, but still the death rate is much different, much lower than what has happened in the last Spanish flu, for example, right? All those things, the positive, let's focus on the positive outcomes, is because of technology innovations that exist today and continue to happen.
Absolutely, you're totally right, and I feel like questions like this are even more important because we sometimes don't realize where the impact of certain things on the economy really come from, because there's so many different relationships and different structures to think about before you can really answer questions like this. Like the US Postal Service, for example, some people might say, technically it's losing money, it's not earning anything, it's a drain on the economy, but really if you think about it, they are powering the economy in the US in a lot of different ways by doing like last mile shipping for UPS and FedEx and all these other shipping companies in rural areas that they simply have no economic incentive to do shipping for.
Right.
So, something that costs 50 cents to ship to a rural area in the U.S. through the U.S. Postal Service would cost like $10 through UPS. 50 cents versus $10, right? The economic impact of just having the postal service there is absolutely huge, and some people don't realize that immediately. So, questions like this is really important, because when we innovate and when we invent new technology, it's important for us to realize how exactly we end up impacting the economy that way. But next
Yeah.
up, another question from Akash Gupta. He's asking, how can students instill all those qualities of, collaboration, adapting, innovating, sales, so that they are industry ready and so that they are critical thinkers and so they are competitive?
Okay, I'll give you a very tactical advice, I think. I think project works, so small project team, for example, I think can really train, enable, and again, we pick a topic of your project. It could be around technology, it could be around social group, whatever you're doing. It could be a research on a certain topic that's close to your heart that you're really passionate about. I think those are different again topics that you could pick up and do more projects, short projects. I think it would really help. These doesn't have to be 12 months or 18 months of PhD like research, but shorter projects when you're in academics, while you're grasping new concept, while you're learning new pieces of information, technology, skills, whatever is out there. How can you put all of those learnings you're having in a real environment through constructed projects will help you drive or learn the art of collaboration. I think so to bring in all things like how do you communicate with each other, how you're a good team player, how you're able to think critically, and how you're able to enforce your ability to learn, right? I think all of those things will become tactically more relevant the more you can execute on smaller projects. I'll give you a small example. I'm part of a nonprofit here in New York. It's called YIC, the Young Indian Culture Group. So our mission is to promote our culture across, people who live in the community around. So with the pandemic, we used to have real in-person classes over Saturdays, but that's not happening anymore. Safety is first, but at the same time, you don't want to give up on what you're doing. So we moved to a digital model, and we are in the process of moving to a digital model. Now, the teachers who are part of this volunteering effort come from different kind of experiences. So not everybody is a technologist to move to a digital world. Um, so what we've done is there are ambassadors, there are people who are taking on this whole digitization of a social nonprofit group, for example, as a small project. So this is one example of a project where I can apply my technology knowledge to help enable the movement from in person to a digital. It's just one small example, right? It's very short term. It's a good use of my technology. I'm also going to learn in the process, and I'm going to end up working with different types of people. So look for those kinds of opportunities around yourself. You'll also feel gratified for contributing back to the community. I think to me personally, I find it very promising and very enabling. It just gives me direction. What else I need to know? What else I don't know, for example.
Yeah, and I feel like you're right. Working on these small projects can be really impactful because you get experience working with a bunch of different technologies, a bunch of different cultures and organizations, and you get to do it while still getting like credit for it. Like for example, at Cognitive Class, which is one of the organizations within IBM that I work with, and I create courses for Cognitive Class and that kind of thing. One of the things that we always encourage is when you finish a lab, when you finish a Jupyter lab or Jupyter notebook, upload that to your GitHub, because what's happening is you're building this portfolio of, look, I've done all of this throughout my course or throughout the projects that I've worked on, and people can see that, right? People can see these different projects that you've worked on. So I think it's you're right. That is absolutely important. Contributing
Yeah.
different open source projects too, right? Like Swift for TensorFlow is an open source project. Back when it was really new, is I started sort of contributing to it, and it's something that I'm passionate about. I learned a lot about the world of Swift, learned a lot about the world of compilers, how TensorFlow works, and at the same time, as you said, feels good to be able to contribute back to the community and back to the toolkits that me and hundreds of other developers are going to be using for our work. So I
Yeah.
think
And,
it's
and it is an experienced economy. It's an experienced world we live in. You can
mhm.
learn a lot of things. If you don't put them into practice, I think your knowledge, your experience will be very limited. Your impact will get restricted. So the more experimentation, the more project-based approach you can take as a student, the better outcomes you will yield that will get you ready for a corporate world. And again, remember a company like IBM, we are very focused on um, you know Tech is a big program, for example, where graduate, undergraduate degrees not necessarily are describing who you are. So what you just said, Tanmay, for example, if you written a piece of code, upload on a GitHub, that to me will tell me more about whether you really know the topic versus somebody who will say, "Oh, I've done 10 years of standard school training, for example. I think those things are going to keep changing.
You're right. They're going to
Right?
continue to evolve, right? And open
Yeah.
source technology has really been a godsend for this sort of industry. So the resources are there, right? The you have the sort of infrastructure to be able to do it. Now all there really is left is to sort of go ahead and leverage those resources, things like Cognitive Class and GitHub and these different technologies available to actually go ahead and learn those skills. So hopefully that answered your question, Akash. Now I do want to quickly take a bit of a detour with a question from Meghana. She's asking, is AI working on any aspects related to psychology? I believe it would drastically reduce rates of depression, especially in teens and adults. What are your opinions? Of course, I do have some thoughts on this, but first I wanted to get your thoughts, Sheetal.
Okay, the short answer is yes, absolutely, please. Depression, not only in teens, but yes, absolutely, it does also. And the more we've stayed at home, the more we feel like depression, the world is black, the world is coming to an end. Those fears are overpowering our hopes, if you will. From a technology perspective, IBM, are my organization, we have technology called Personality Insight, and you may have already tested that out as
Mm-hmm.
well. But I find that is a good technology that can be used to identify people who may be going through depressions or loneliness, or any kind of psychological impact, if you will. But again, all of this to put in practice goes back to the concept of data. Where is the data,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, think about the situation. I could be a 70-year-old person, or I could be a 13-year-old young teen who is now forced to work from the confinement of my room with very limited social interaction, right? Now, how you identify me? How do you find out about me? You could be tracking my digital footprint, but again, the digital footprint sometimes is not really reflecting what I'm going through. That is where the challenge is. From a technology perspective, if there is enough evidence, if there is enough prints in the market out there that can be analyzed and tracked and said somebody is demonstrating a behavior pattern XYZ, which leads into depression kind of a situation, technically, yes, absolutely possible. But I think the harder problem is to identify what sources of data can I trust to put that technology in place, right? And then there are other elements around. Once I've got this, I've started creating some look-like models, and I've said, people like this who demonstrate attributes A, B, C typically fall in this zone. Then this whole model training is so new in this area because there is sometimes we don't really talk about our depressions, for example, publicly, right? So I think there is some more research work that needs to happen from connecting the dots and saying, if A happens, then B is an outcome, for example. The causation correlation, I think, is not there yet, but it's a very applicable field, very important, very relevant in this environment. And I'm hoping some of you out there who are listening or will listen, are consciously going to put some, interest, some efforts to come out with some kind of a more advanced solution, because I genuinely think that it is a real problem. While social media is connecting people, at the same time, it's also creating a lot of isolated environments, which humanly are not good for our own health, spiritual wellness, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you're right. Technology is kind of like a double-edged sword in that sense, but I do believe that technology in general will help us in fact to actually solve this problem. You may have heard there is a project that I'm working on around machine learning and mental health, and I will say that one of the main sort of concerns about this entire project is data, right? At the end of the day, data is something that's really, really sensitive in this field, and not only difficult to get access to, but difficult to, I would say, convince people that it's important for us to get access to. We take such a proactive approach with our physical health with regular technology, right? You've got an Apple Watch that's reminding me literally during this webinar, hey, you've got to stand up, you've got to exercise, it's telling me to complete my rings and stuff. But it's not doing the same thing for mental health. We've started to, the Apple Watch Breathe feature and things like this, but it's not it's not there yet, right? And so I feel like there's still a long way to go, but machine learning technology definitely can help us with understanding patterns because physical health, you can slap an accelerometer and gyroscope on an Apple Watch, implement a couple of algorithms, and suddenly, hey, you've got exercise tracking. But when it comes to mental health, you can't really slap an accelerometer and gyroscope on your head, right? You've got to really understand people's thoughts, people's emotions, and that requires some kind of unstructured data perception ability within technology to be able to do that at scale. And that's where machine learning comes in. So yes, it's definitely possible. There are use cases, like for example, one of my favorite Watson APIs you mentioned, personality insights, and so there are definitely ways to do it. It's something that people have been working on, and all I can say is that I'm sure that within the future there will be more use cases sort of surrounding that area. As a matter of fact, now that you mentioned it, there is going to be a very special episode coming up in a couple of weeks with the managing director at a psychology company that has that. I'm not going to give you too much of a spoiler, but it's going to be a really fun episode, is what I'm going to say. I'm really looking forward to it, at least. Right? He's the managing director and the founder at that company. We're going to be talking about mental health, so make sure you do tune in a couple of weeks. He's done a lot of work in that field. Right, now there is one more question that I want to ask from Tassin, and after that, I do want to ask one last question from me as well. And this question from Tassin is, how do you actually discover your customers' latent needs, and how do you measure the progress that you've made on new ideas?
Very simple. Determination. How do you determine customer's problem? Listen, observe. There are a lot of signals you get by listening. The problem is sometimes we forget to listen. We are we're on a roll and we want to tell everything we know. Listen. That's my simple one-word answer. Please listen more. Read about the market. There is the good news is there's so much out there in the public domain right now that you can use to educate yourself. Um, and sometimes you don't even, I mean, ask one question and the client will open up, so go in with listening ears. I guess that's the first part of the question. And then second is, how do you track performance, right, or outcome? Is that what you said? Tell me.
Yes.
Make sure I'm saying it. Please, and I'm a big champion. I always believe that if anything you can't measure and monitor, you will fail, right? So always pre-agree on some kind of success criteria. I can't, for my own life, in any 16 years working now, probably have done few hundreds of projects between these three great organizations I've worked with. I can't recall even one single engagement where we did not have a metric to track. And don't make that metric super complicated. Again, remember, not try to boil the ocean. Have one simple metric, or two simple metrics that will be used to demonstrate progress that you are making on your project, right? So if you are building, simple example, a chatbot, right? So chatbot has been one of the most common use cases of AI technology. So how many positive reviews you get after you've launched a chatbot, for example, or how many new types of questions your chatbot is ready to answer with a certain level of confidence. Simple metrics that you all can collectively, jointly agree on, reflect on. I think that should help you keep monitor your performance. And don't, again, if you have like 50 pages of document that telling this is your success, this is your MIS, management information system reporting, there's something wrong there. Pick a simple metric, everybody can measure, everybody can track, everybody can relate to it. And I'm pretty confident that it will get you on a rolling start.
So I absolutely love what you mentioned in terms of having that metric. My mentor Tim calls that the North Star metric, and what I absolutely love about what you just mentioned is that there are so many parallels where we can see that metric, that objective, is really important to even the outcome and what you end up building. And unless you have a very carefully engineered metric to see what your progress has been, you're not going to get where you expect, right? For example, there was a reinforcement learning algorithm this team was building. It's actually a super famous example, and they incentivized the network to not get killed in the game, and all it would do would was pause the game and just not play, because it realized that, hey, if I'm not getting any negative outcome from just pausing the game, then why play in the first place, or I have a chance of getting negative, right? So it would just pause the game. So the metric is so important. There's a I actually love this article by Tim. It's a tale of two police departments. I'm actually going to quote this. I opened it up here, and he says, so when Reagan ramped up the war on drugs, in order to do that in the quickest way possible, the U.S. Grant Office created grants which were incentivized by the total number of arrests made by each police department. Now, in the president's head, that would lead to the police correctly arresting people that did something illegal, but that ended up turning the situation into what it is today, and so you've got to really carefully think about exactly what your metric is, because while you might see like a vision of where you want to go in the future, unless the easiest way to get to your metric is exactly that vision, you're going to end up doing something else. So,
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to really think about that.
I love that. I'm going to retain it. And I think just one more thing I would add, in the post-COVID world, guys, we're going to be very different, right? We don't have benchmarks that we can go relate to, because whatever we are going through right now, there is no historical data. You can't compare this because it never happened in the past, right? How many people are going to come to my store? I can't tell you, because I don't know how many times COVID-19 happened and I shut down my store for 6 months and now people are going to come back. It's very hard. So please, again, I keep encouraging, historical data benchmarks don't exist for the situation we are in. So a lot of A/B testing technologies we were using would probably have to be further improvised. But having said that, having a metric in place we all stare at and agree on, and again, it's okay to change the metric definition and the benchmark that you set up yourself for. Sometimes it can be very unrealistic as well. For one of my projects, for example, we ended up saying, okay, the metric is whatever we are building, what you build with Watson, for example, would be will lead to sales generation improvement by 10%. This is like at the cusp when COVID was beginning to happen. We set up that target. We're going to see a 10% uplift. Guys, the stores are closed. Nobody's traveling. How do we show that? That doesn't happen. So good news is we were able to step back and said, wait a minute, that metric needs to change. Otherwise, it's going to make us all look as if we have failed, but that's not the reality. So be ready to adjust your metric. That's it.
Yeah, and it can always change, right? I mean, it could even change with changing needs, maybe you purposely want to have a metric that maybe you don't necessarily reach with stop midway, right? Like going back to training machine learning algorithms like OpenAI GPT-2. What do we do if we wanted to generate writing prompts from Reddit? We train it on web text. Right? But then we stop that metric, and then we go to the book corpus, and then we stop that metric, and then we go to the writing prompts, and we stop that metric, and then we go to swag, and we do all these different metrics and different sort of checkpoints, and continuously fine-tune and get more and more narrow and sort of fine-grained to what it is that we want it to do. So you're right, these metrics can definitely change, and they're super important.
And just as a framework, better, faster, cheaper. These could be your 3 dimensions. Now you can go and define whatever metric you think will be relevant in your situation. But I find that framework very helpful for my own projects. When I try to pick what's the right metric, if I can I do it better? Can I do it faster? And can I do it cheaper? Find your metric now.
Wonderful. Now, really quickly before we go, there's a little rapid fire thing I want to ask you. So, really quickly, if you had a time machine and you could go back to the beginning of your career, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Read more.
Okay, read more.
Read more. That's number 1. Learn to say no. I think culturally, I'm not trained to say no to a lot of things where I come from, but I wish I could say no more. And again, it's just to prioritize in life. And then I think last thing is have the confidence to take more risks, conduct more experiments. That's how I would like to change if I could.
Wonderful. All right, so read more, learn to say no, and conduct more experiments. Nice. All right. So now, really quickly, one more thing I do want to get your thoughts on. How do you think the world of technology is going to change because of COVID in the next couple of years? The main points that you think are going to happen in the world of tech.
I don't have a crystal ball, Tanmay. I wish I knew it. What's going to change? I will keep it very philosophical, which is to say, we all need to know and remember, after every storm, there is the rainbow, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that no matter what kind of storm, we are going to come out of this, and there will be future pandemics, right? I think it's just this is something that has exposed all of us how fragile we are as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So role of technology from my perspective, I think will deepen. It's not going away, it's not going back. I think technology tactically should be a mandatory skill that everybody learns. Kids who are in school, you're very lucky, you can learn the skill. But I'm talking about people who are in their professions, in their midlife, in their senior lives, if you will. Imagine how hard it is for them to learn technology. So that skill enablement program is one thing I have to pick after post COVID-19. I think there should be a focused effort by organizations, by legislators, by regulators, by people like us. We have to pick up a few number of people, maybe form little cohorts. I did my own friends and family. IBM came up with some program that I just launched it in my whole network of people. I said, don't expect to become Tanmay, but what you will do is, we'll at least talk about new technologies, the implications. So again, learn to learn dimension, but reskilling to stay relevant is going to be fundamental to what happens and what will happen more after COVID-19, I think. Stick to that. And
Wonderful.
I'm hopeful person in general in life. So I have my fears, but hopefully this will end soon at this point. I think I want to get out now.
Hopefully.
But yeah, I hope it ends soon. I hope everybody stays healthy and keep doing great in their life. And you
Wonderful.
keep doing the great work you're doing. Thank you for doing it.
Of course. Thank you very much. I mean, it's first of all an honor to have you on the show. It's wonderful to be able to do this again. Hopefully, we can go back to doing things in person. It's amazing. We did a couple episodes in the beginning of the series. Actually, flew people down over here to Toronto and did the episodes that way. But unfortunately, of course, we had to stop that in between, and now we're doing it virtually. But hopefully, we can get back to doing it in person soon. See you in person, and I think that would be absolutely incredible. Now, before we leave today, as you know, we've got a really diverse audience today. We've got developers, people from a more business background. People of all different ages. What's one piece of advice that you would give all of them, like a closing message for our audience today?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'll still say it. Be a lifelong learner. There's nothing more than that. That's it. Lifelong learner. 2 words.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. You're absolutely right. Learning throughout your life is becoming more and more critical every single day, and that's because we are experiencing exponential innovation, right? We're innovating at paces we've never seen before, and that's enabling us to innovate even faster because of that, right? It's everything's adding on top of each other, and it's become more and more important, especially in a time like now, as we can see, for us to be able to learn not only new concepts for our careers, but even just the choices that we make in life, right? Making more informed choices about COVID and where you want to go, where you don't want to go, what you do and don't want to do, being able to learn about different technologies if you have a career in technology. This is absolutely critical. So being a lifelong learner, that's wonderful, a wonderful message. Thank you very much for sharing. So thank you, Sheetal. It was an honor to have you on the show. Now, one more thing I would also like to say is a huge thank you to everybody joining the live stream today. And so remember, these streams are held every Sunday in the morning Eastern Time at 11 a.m. And so make sure you join us next week. I am incredibly excited for next week. We're going to be talking to someone that I personally am really thrilled to be able to talk with, and I think you're absolutely going to love talking to him as well. And yeah, so thank you very much, Sheetal. Thank you everyone for joining in today, and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.